The death toll continues to rise in the Amsterdam plane crash. Jeff Kennett takes the reins and finds the cupboard almost bare, and the big business of selling Elle Macpherson.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Whaley.
Good evening. 20 bodies have been recovered, but at least 209 people are still missing after the Amsterdam air disaster. The Elle cargo jet ploughed into an apartment complex after two engines caught fire shortly after takeoff. The pilot turned back to make an emergency landing, but could not clear the surrounding suburbs. Searchers are now picking their way through the crumpled complex, fearful that large sections of it might collapse. These reports are just in from Amsterdam.
The crash happened just 14 minutes after the Elle jumbo had taken off. With both engines on fire, the plane plunged into a densely populated suburb of Amsterdam, first cutting a swathe of fire through a small park, before hitting a 10-story apartment block, bursting into a ball of flames from which there was no escape. For the emergency services, this was a disaster of unparalleled proportions. Fire spread through 80 apartments and burned all through the night.
We saw the aircraft bank and turn, and as we saw it turn, we saw smoke coming from both wingtips. And all of a sudden, my wife looked over there, and she could see from the angle she was sitting the flames bursting in the air from the aircraft coming right down to the street.
The apartment block had been cleaved in two from top to bottom. Even among hardened rescue crews, there was a sense of utter disbelief at the wholesale devastation here. If the captain had not dumped his fuel over a nearby lake, the scale of the disaster would have been simply unimaginable. This man said he and a number of children had escaped by smashing glass doors and using knotted sheets to climb down outside walls. It will be many weeks before some get back into their homes. When they do, they'll face even more problems. Overnight, looters have been at work stealing whatever they can find.
At first light, the devastation caused by the Elle jet was unmistakable. A residential block sliced open by the impact. The residents had virtually no warning, the plane dropping like a burning stone through the building.
27 absolutely gone. And the average is about 4 inhabitants on every living unit.
Some bodies were recovered, hoisted carefully away from the debris. But the work was slow and difficult. The firemen fearing the building could collapse at any time.
When the firemen first arrived, the surrounding were fire. In the flat, on the floor, where you looked, there was fire.
Heavy lifting gear is now in place, removing some of the most dangerous parts of the wrecked flats.
Aviation investigators now face the painstaking job of trying to find out what caused the engine fires in the 747. Sabotage has not been ruled out, but a technical fault is thought the most likely reason, not just because of Elle's safety record, but also its high security around both passenger and cargo flights.
Aviation experts were immediately inclined to dismiss any theory of terrorist attack to explain the Schiphol disaster because of Elle's legendary security. This is the airline's first accident in its 44-year history. It extends strict security to its freight fleet as well as its passenger planes. Its freight airliners, unlike these, have no insignia or names as an extra security measure. Flight 1862 took off from New York JFK Airport at 8:19 and landed at Schiphol almost 6.5 hours later. 4 hours afterwards, it departed Schiphol at 6:22 for the final leg of its journey back to Israel. At 6:36, the pilot reported his engines on fire and attempted to return to Schiphol. 9 minutes later came the fatal crash. The 747-200 cargo plane was built in 1979 and is said to have no previous malfunctions. The puzzle that investigators now need to solve is why 2 Pratt & Whitney engines on the plane failed. The best theory is that one engine failed first.
Then those bits of debris could either directly hit the other engine or be ingested by the other engine.
Flight paths into airports are designed to avoid built-up areas as far as possible, but airports like Heathrow and Schiphol have been engulfed by growing suburban areas. And last night, with 2 engines out, the pilot would have found it impossible to maintain height. The pilot wouldn't have been able to manoeuvre much to avoid tower blocks without losing height more rapidly and more dangerously.
Just as there's a tradition of kissing babies before an election, there's another tradition that must be upheld after an election. That's when new incoming governments always lament that the state of the economy is far worse than anyone has suspected. It's a caution that salvation might take longer than promised. Still, it must be a daunting job ahead for Victoria's victorious Liberal leader, Jeff Kennett. More from Simon Clark.
The swelling of the Liberal ranks forced a move to the bigger former Labor Party room, where MPs, new and old, welcomed their victorious leader like a hero. Many of those present looked excited but a bit lost, as if it were the first day of school, and that feeling was reinforced when a roll call of members was ordered.
Brighton, Alan Stockton.
The business of the meeting was to confirm Jeff Kennett as leader and give him the authority to choose the 17 other Liberals who'll be in the cabinet, along with 4 Nationals. Mr Kennett announced that the lineup will be the same as before the election, although the manufacturing spokesman Roger Pescott has been demoted to a new industry services portfolio, serving under Industry Minister Phil Goode. Mr Kennett, who'll be sworn in as Premier tomorrow, says he's already received bad news from the public service.
I don't think, given the depth of our economic position, I don't think that any of them are going to be able to be resolved immediately. I think we are in for a very long haul as we try and rearrange Victoria's finances.
The Labor Party has put off until Wednesday its decision about who will be its leaders, although there now seems little doubt that the former Premier will be allowed to continue as opposition leader if she wishes. There's a great deal of squabbling, though, about the position of her current deputy, Jim Kennan. This afternoon, Mrs Kerner visited Government House to resign her commission as Premier. She's expected to announce tomorrow that she will stand again as leader, though not until after she's had some stern words for former Agriculture Minister Ian Baker, whom Mrs Kerner's left-wing supporters have accused of preparing a leadership challenge. That he denies.
And as far as I'm concerned, she should continue if she wishes to. Now, I don't know what her intentions are, and we'll just have to see.
But Mr Baker and several others are expected to seek the deputy's position. Meanwhile, the former Labor administration's offices at Treasury Place have been cleared ready for occupation by the coalition. But some cheeky reminders have been left for the new tenants.
Investigators say a corroded pressure valve caused an explosion at a New South Wales holiday camp. 2 children are still in hospital after a hot water system blew up at the Broken Bay Sports Centre north of Sydney. 10 girls and 2 instructors needed hospital treatment. The blast blew the water heater through the roof of the dormitory. It landed 70 metres away. One of the girls broke both ankles and had to be flown to Sydney. The rest were treated at Gosford for burns and cuts from flying glass. Senior police and the organisers of an Aboriginal sporting carnival have dismissed any thought of racial overtones in a clash between police and revellers at a hotel in Petersham in Sydney's inner west. 4 people were arrested after the 600-strong crowd pelted police with cans and bottles. Many involved in the brawl are visiting Sydney for the New South Wales Aboriginal Rugby League Championships. The plight of a young Victorian family has highlighted the shortage of organ transplants for infants. Simon and Jenny Tobin's son Daniel, just 13 days old, is one of hundreds of babies that need help that's all too rarely available. Daniel was born with a rare heart condition. Its left side is not fully developed and he needs a transplant. The frustration that's made his parents go public with Daniel's story to heighten awareness of the extent of the donor shortage. The federal government is bracing itself for a battle with the states over how health funding is carved up. New South Wales Health Minister Ron Phillips says Jeff Kennett's victory in Victoria strengthens the hand of Conservative states who are demanding a bigger share of the Medicare levy.
New South Wales has long complained its health budget has been shortchanged by the Medicare agreement. That and the increase in patients opting out of private insurance are the reasons behind the government's drive towards privatisation. Health Minister Ron Phillips estimates Commonwealth funding has fallen $1.3 billion since 1985. Now, with the election of a Liberal government in Victoria, Mr Phillips wants to gang up against Federal Minister Brian Howe at a special health ministers' conference later this month.
Our calculations clearly indicate that we'll have further cutbacks to the New South Wales hospital system. That has been the history since 1985, and it cannot continue.
Mr Phillips has invited the state Liberal health ministers to Sydney on Thursday. The aim to take a united stand, ending a situation where the federal government has forced through funding cuts by striking deals with the Labor states. Fearing the inevitable in Victoria, Canberra wanted the health ministers' conference held before Saturday's election. But the Conservative states, led by New South Wales, succeeded in postponing the meeting. Now together they're hoping to halt the slide in federal health funding.
With 4 Liberal states, we'll be able to have a strong negotiating position with the federal government.
Mr Phillips claims the states would again lose out under the latest Medicare funding offer. Renegotiating that deal will be crucial to healthcare standards over the next 5 years. Brad Schmidt for Nightline.
Coming up on Nightline, the tornadoes that hit Florida. Why weren't they warned? The people of Florida must have watched the approach of Hurricane Andrew in August with a mixture of alarm and morbid fascination. Weather satellites and forecasters plotted and predicted its path for a couple of days. People watched their fate approach on television at every news bulletin. That experience is in contrast to the latest disaster in Florida. 3 people died and dozens of houses were destroyed, including this one flipped onto its side as a series of tornadoes hopscotched across the Tampa Bay area. Now an investigation is underway to find out why residents were given no warning of the approach of the twisters. Thousands of Germans have marched in protest against rising racism and anti-Semitism and to counter weekend rallies by the extreme right. They gathered in the former Nazi camp of Sachsenhausen, where a Jewish memorial was firebombed last week. Israeli writer Amos Oz urged Germans to stand up to violence against Jewish targets and refugee hostels. A demonstrator has lobbed a smoke bomb at Japan's Emperor Akihito as he opened a sports festival in northern Japan. It missed, and the attacker was quickly swamped by guards and arrested. The protest was over a proposed visit by the emperor to China. Some extreme factions oppose the visit because they fear that the emperor will apologize for World War II atrocities. They don't believe he should. Bad weather is hampering relief flights into the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo, but 2 Canadian and 2 US aircraft have managed to take in some food. As well, they carried instruments that will help future aid flights land in bad weather. The 3 factions fighting in Bosnia have today signed an agreement to identify and start releasing prisoners held in camps.
Herded behind barbed wire, starved and often tortured, freedom must have seemed a remote possibility to the thousands in Bosnian detention camps. But now Serbs, Croats and Muslims have reached agreement, on paper at least, to release all detainees trapped by the civil war. All sides have until Wednesday to exchange the names of prisoners held in camps already known to the Red Cross. By October the 15th, each side will have to provide lists of all other camps and prisoners. And by the end of the month, there should be specific plans to release the detainees. But Lord Owen, who's negotiated this timetable for freedom, says it's just the first step.
The problem, of course, comes from the moment that they're released. Where are they going to go to, and how are they going to cross over, in some cases, the actual battle lines.
1,500 people braved no man's land to travel to safety from a Serbian-run camp in Trinopoli this week. Many had families to meet them and homes to return to. But thousands of others facing release in the coming weeks have little idea where they're going or if they can travel to freedom in safety.
After the break, as the US election nears, more Americans think their future lies with the young contender, and Australia's big push to sell movies overseas. Americans have been caught in a crossfire of election rhetoric. George Bush has been preaching that the United States needs his steady, reliable hand on the helm of state, while Bill Clinton and the Democrats say it's time for a youthful, fresh change. And more Americans think Clinton might just have a point.
That time has come again. The time for a new generation of leadership for the United States of America.
The words are intended to remind us of another young leader.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
That would have been true no matter who won the 1960 election. Kennedy and Nixon both hailed from the World War II generation. Now the last president of their era is in the ring against one candidate only a few years younger, but a Democratic ticket made up of the children of World War II. The generation that demonstrated against the Vietnam War now comprises the biggest age group in the electorate and the one with the most troublesome history. Republicans are trying to remind voters of the wild side of the younger generation, to contrast Clinton's youth with Bush's experience, asking, do you really trust this baby boomer at the helm?
We're talking about the world leader here, and I think at that point then George Bush does far better than Bill Clinton's youth as you look at the two of them together.
I consider Clinton pretty young and pretty inexperienced, and I wish that he had more experience.
Taking a look at Bush, I guess he seems to be from a past generation.
At this stage, what we want is the sense of activism, and we're looking for much more the all-American boy rather than the all-American grandfather.
The age of the major party candidates then serves as a symbol for the campaigns they're waging. Trust versus change, stability versus shakeup. At this point, youth seems to be carrying the day, but the president believes experience will win once the voters pull the curtain.
To sport, and the Melbourne Tigers tonight levelled their National Basketball League quarter-final series against the Perth Wildcats. The Tigers led by 14 points with 6 minutes to play, but just held on to win 95-94. Leonard Copeland top scored for the Tigers with 30, James Crawford popping in 31 for the Wildcats. The deciding game in the series will be played in Melbourne on Wednesday. There'll be no changes to the rules of the Bathurst 1000 despite the most controversial finish in the car race's history. Jim Richards and Mark Scaife in a Nissan were declared the winners to the anger of other drivers and thousands of fans. And there were no beg pardons today from Richards over his victory speech.
As Jim Richards skated to his 5th Bathurst win, preparing a victory speech wasn't on his mind, but he spoke from the heart when confronted with this.
You're a pack of arseholes. I could have just as easily come out smiling and looking good, but they deserved it.
And most agree.
I thought his reaction was fair dinkum. You know, I reckon what he called him was good.
I thought it was pretty terrible. I mean, nobody deserves that.
Well, I would have booed him, man. I was going for the forwards. If I'd seen the people that were doing the yelling tomorrow, I'd probably shout them a drink.
When the race was stopped, Richards and Mark Scaife were awarded victory, even though they had crashed. The regulations say that final placings are based on the order at the last recorded lap. But with the Nissan at the wreckers, the Ford fans thought Dick Johnson had won, and he says the race shouldn't have been stopped.
I'm not grumbling about the guys winning the event at all. That's not what the point is. The point that I'm making is the fact that I think the decision was wrong.
As the mountain farewelled the big race for another year, a feeling of enormous loss. There were many tributes following yesterday's untimely death of Denny Hulme, a World Formula One champion and 10 times competitor here at Bathurst.
Yeah, he's a great guy. It's just very sad though.
Hulme died after suffering a massive heart attack at the wheel of his BMW. And in Pennsylvania, a miraculous escape for IndyCar driver John Andretti after colliding with a spinning competitor. Tyre marks on his helmet showing just how lucky he was. Peter Overton for Nightline.
Australia's film industry seems to have been wallowing in the doldrums for some time now, but our movie makers are confident we can edge back into the spotlight.
From out of the ballroom to centre stage, the feel-good movie of the year giving Australia's film industry the big break it needs. Talk of a resurgence is rife, Strictly Ballroom allowing other Aussie projects to ride on its coattails in an unprecedented fashion.
This will push us ahead in leaps and bounds, not only in Australia but internationally.
Unlikely to eclipse Crocodile Dundee in the blockbuster stakes, Strictly will still open new doors overseas, increasing the prospects for at least 10 quality Australian films to be released in the next 12 months.
The success of Strictly Ballroom will definitely make distributors all over the world stand up and say, we better take another look at what's happening in this country.
Improved financial management, high investor confidence, expanding audiences. Australia's film industry has certainly grown up. But criticism too, its development is still being stunted by scriptwriters who keep concentrating on our idiosyncrasies.
The film market is an international market. And we should be considering making films more for the world than just for ourselves.
Breaking the mould, Miller's latest work, the thriller Gross Misconduct. Yahoo Serious's upcoming feature, Reckless Kelly, has international appeal. So too Secrets, a film about Beatlemania.
We want Elvis!
Others with box office potential, The Nostradamus Kid.
Beware heresy, my dear young brother.
And Gillian Armstrong's The Last Days of Chenu.
You're so greedy. Your family's all the same. Greedy and selfish.
Australia's film industry tends to churn out one blockbuster every 5 years, but Target now making it an annual event. Sharon Gadella for Nightline.
Not much to cheer about in finance news tonight. The Australian share market is down to an 18-month low because of a poor showing on Wall Street, and no trading in Sydney today because of a public holiday. In Tokyo, the Nikkei closed lower for the 7th consecutive day of trading, this time down 222 points. In London tonight, the FT100 is almost 50 points down, while the pound has fallen to a record low against the mark, down to 238. Gold is worth $348.75 at the moment, and in European trading tonight, the Australian dollar is buying 72.3 US cents, just on 1 Deutschmark, 86 yen and 42p. The national weather, and a cold front is heading east through the Bight, and it looks like bringing rain as it crosses into southeastern Australia tomorrow night. The forecast's fine weather is on the cards for most areas, from Darwin to Brisbane and along the east coast. There'll be late showers in Hobart and rain developing in Adelaide, and a mainly fine day for Perth. Usually our heroes have sung a song, played a movie role, hit a bat or kicked a ball. But Elle Macpherson has made it to superstardom simply by being very beautiful and very smart. Chris Castellari looks at Elle's latest tour de force to her native shores.
There seems no limit to Elle's appeal. There were teenagers, there were grandfathers. She was mobbed like an all-conquering hero. They were there to see a model whose leap to fame came after her 3 appearances on the cover of Sports Illustrated, a magazine few Australians have even seen. And they were there to see her underwear, designed by her but modelled by others. When she did finally take to the catwalk, the crowd went wild. The underwear line and health videos are something to secure her future. In the fickle beauty business, the 28-year-old realises the $25,000 paydays won't last forever. Interviewed on A Current Affair, she pointed to models turned actors like Lauren Hutton and Christy Brinkley, who continue to succeed. But there are sensitive issues. To claims that her best-selling calendar was little more than soft porn.
To try and talk about this in great depth is giving it more credit and more attention than this is about. I mean, the calendar is not about that, and so let's just drop it.
There was also little sympathy for feminists concerned at exploitation of the female form. However, there is still a little of the girl next door. Marriage and children are definitely included in her 10-year plan. Chris Castellari for Nightline.
And that's Nightline for this Monday night. Before we go, take a look at this. Hawaii's Mount Kilauea is up to its old tricks again. No communities in danger at this stage, but what a spectacle. Aloha and good night.